I'm Dan Buchanan. Here in Brighton, they call me Dan the History Guy. This series of videos is about farming in municipal Brighton, from early settlement to modern online farming. One of the myths about farming that deserves to be debunked is that farm life is somehow monotonous and boring. Well, that was not the case on the farm where I grew up. By the way, that's me on the left with my dad, my sister Mary Lou on the right, and our dog Bingo, and one of many cats. In particular, I point to the time in 1962 when we had a two-headed calf. Yes, you heard right, a two-headed calf. And I was the one who found it in the field. Can you imagine, as an 11-year-old kid, finding this in the field? My grandfather had driven us to the field with his Jeep and had gone off fence mending. When I overcame the shock of seeing that second nose down in the grass, I yelled for Grandfather to get over here, right now. He came quickly and had his own moment of surprise. I could tell he was shocked because he lit his pipe and smoked for a few minutes. Doc Trimble, the vet in Camelford, told us that two-headed calf births were not as rare as you might think, but it was very unusual for the calf to survive birth. This calf lived for 10 days and was truly an amazing phenomenon. People came from all around to see this unique sight. My brother Lloyd and I spent time posing with the calf and telling the tale. Mr. Austin took these wonderful pictures, and we sold them to visitors. After the calf died, its brain was kept in formaldehyde on a shelf at the lab in the Agricultural College at Guelph and used for research. It's certainly something I'll never forget. On a happier note, there were also important events such as the birth of healthy Holstein Triplets at the Harrington farm, which was the talk of the countryside for a time. Here we see Esley Harrington with his pride and joy. Did you know that from 1956 to 1961, the Minister of Agriculture for Ontario was a farmer from Mount Olivet? That's right. Bill Goodfellow, shown here in the early days on the hustings, grew up on a farm at Mount Olivet that is part of the Clitheroe farm today. As a young man, he was active in local government, serving on council, and he was reeve for a time, as well as being involved in county government. In 1943, he ran for the Provincial Conservative Party and won handily. He would win several elections in the next 2 decades. My dad often said that Bill Goodfellow could get elected in Northumberland County any day of the week, and it's not difficult to understand why. His political bosses were impressed, and in 1946, after only 3 years as a backbencher, Bill Goodfellow was given the important portfolio of Minister of Public Welfare, which he held for 9 years. In 1956, he became Minister of Agriculture. In all, he was MPP for Northumberland County for 20 years and served the province very effectively. As to policy, Bill Goodfellow supported the new idea of marketing boards as a way to maintain consistent pricing for farm products. He pushed for better agricultural education as a means of keeping young farmers on the farm. Cheaper hydro rates were a point of discussion, but Bill Goodfellow wanted to encourage more farmers to install hydro, which was proven to enhance both the productivity of the farm and the lifestyle of the farm family. Many of the policies he supported over 2 decades at Queen's Park would be included in legislation. In 2009, he was recognized for his work and he was inducted into the Wall of Fame at the Hastings County Museum of Agriculture in Stirling, also known as Farmtown Park. In my research for Rural Roots, I identified the 1940s and 1950s as a time of pervasive change in the lives of farmers. If you were driving around the countryside during that time, you could see both old and new technology working closely together, especially in harvesting grain. As we see here, there was a modern rubber-wheeled tractor using its drive wheel to operate a mill. At the same time, we see horses drawing wagons full of grain. and the grain being manhandled with pitchforks. Horses would be used well into the 1950s until being replaced by tractors. The mill, or threshing machine, was still a vital part of harvesting, but destined to be displaced by combines and forage harvesters operated by the power takeoff of the tractor. These men were dealing with significant change every day, and they would see a lot more in the decades ahead. One day in the 1960s, my dad stood on the milkhouse stoop and pointed to the big manure pile to the east of our barn. He explained to his teenage son that milking dairy cows would no longer be viable in this barn because of the strict new regulations regarding liquid manure management. The manure pile was a few yards from number 30 highway and the ditch that ran down the slope into the village of Codrington and finally to Marsh Creek. The cost of installing a treatment facility would be prohibitive. A few years later, the last cow left the barn, ending a century of milk production at this location. Such was the upheaval that the awakening of environmental issues brought to farmers in the 1960s and beyond. Of course, many farmers were able to continue. Here is Doug Goodfellow, a nephew of Bill Goodfellow's, with the forage harvester and wagons. Farming was very much a family affair in Mount Olivet for the Goodfellows. In the early 1950s, a young Englishman named Mick Clitheroe came to work as a hired man, and he eventually would marry Doug's daughter, Betty Ann. This family would develop one of the largest dairy operations in the area, which is now run by sons Carl and Kevin Clitheroe. When Mick first came to the area, he was hungry for knowledge. He studied agriculture for 2 years at Kempville, then worked at the lab in the new agricultural office in Brighton before farming full-time. For many years, he was very active in the Soil Crop Association, being president for a time. Mick and his family would aggressively improve methods and technologies of farming. They were among the first to use high-moisture corn and to implement no-till operations in the 1980s. Sometimes farmers like to play, but sometimes they play at work. This event was held near Grafton in 1988. It was a full-scale demonstration of 2 threshing machines, a binder, and an old steel-wheeled tractor. The fellow driving the tractor is Esley Harrington, and I am told that he had a whale of a time that day. It looks like it, doesn't it? Now let's talk about farming today. Justin Dorland and his wife, Jennifer, operate one of the largest dairy operations in the area. They can tell us a lot about how farming works today. They are part of the generation that is seeing farm vehicles full of electronics, monitoring themselves and even driving themselves sometimes. The lack of skilled labor and the need to minimize cost pushes technology to ever greater heights. Large, efficient farms gobble up smaller farms and open up our rural landscape even more by removing old barns and irrelevant fences. Here is an example of a piece of technology that doesn't require an app so much as willing users. These cow brushes are in every dairy barn now. 15 years ago, you would manually clip or brush every cow to remove the dead hair. Now, cows come and go as they please, happy to get a nice scratch and to keep themselves clean. There are times when there are lineups for the brush. Crops have changed significantly over time as well. Corn, soybeans, and hay are now the 3 most common field crops at more or less equal acreage. Wheat has fallen to 4th place due to lack of profitability, problems with disease, and issues with production. Not least are the significant advancements in yields for other crops. Corn and soybeans are in high demand because they have many uses, including animal feed, biofuels, and food ingredients. One of the most amazing changes is the growth in yields for corn. Through advancements in breeding, yield has doubled in the last 35 years in this area. Justin explains that when his father Bill came home from college in 1979, a good crop of corn produced 95 bushels per acre. Now it is very common to exceed 200 bushels per acre in many fields. This picture shows Carl Clitheroe harvesting corn silage for the Dorlands. Justin says that they used to harvest their own corn silage 2 rows at a time. It would take 2 weeks to harvest all 50 acres. By contrast, Carl's forage harvester cuts 6 rows at a time and can finish 110 acres in 3 days. You have to find the best way to do the job and not get stuck on how we used to do it. The nature of tillage has changed dramatically as well. Plowing and deep tillage are seldom used now, partly because the damage from decades of this practice has become evident in the soil, and partly because our understanding of the technology of the soil has improved. Every time we plow, we decrease the organic matter, which is the lifeblood of the soil. Minimum tillage or no-till are much more sustainable and represent the future. Northumberland County is lucky to have a large number of progressive farmers, which means that we have one of the highest rates of farmers doing no-till in the province. Some farmers may also tell you it has something to do with the number of rocks turned up from deep tillage across the good old rolling hills of Northumberland. Cover crops have gained popularity in recent years because they help rejuvenate the soil back to proper health. After crops like wheat or corn silage are harvested, then oats, fall rye, or tillage radish can be planted. These crops take up extra nutrients not used by the previous crop, and their roots hold the soil in place over the winter. Having a green crop growing on the same field for 10 or 12 months a year greatly increases the health of the soil. These cover crops can be harvested for hay, killed with Roundup in the spring, or they may be killed by frost in the late fall. The picture on the left is fall rye. It stays green all winter and takes up a great deal of nitrogen and phosphorus, reducing runoff over the winter and spring. The picture on the right is tillage radish, shown in the fall before it died off from frost. It works great to break up compaction left behind by large equipment. The Dorland farm uses a product called Fitbit, which monitors the well-being of cows. An electronic device is attached to the cow's ear, and sensors in the device detect details such as temperature and digestive activity. Data is sent by the device to a database on a website. Artificial intelligence is applied to the data in order to determine if any of the information is outside of normal ranges. The farmer has a Fitbit app on his smartphone, which displays graphs and charts to show what is happening with each cow. When certain thresholds are reached, a warning is sent to the farmer's phone to warn about possible issues with the animal. Justin says that sometimes his phone moos at him. It's not hard to imagine how this kind of tool changes the life of the farmer, not to mention the cows. Over on the regulatory side, government audits are now part of modern agriculture. Most livestock farms need a nutrient management plan. This is a plan that shows the Ontario Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change that the farm has enough land to apply the manure it produces, and that recommended nitrogen and phosphorus levels won't be exceeded. A plan needs to be done every 5 years, and random inspections can happen at any time. Every 2 years, farmers can also expect random and unannounced inspections by the dairy farmers of Ontario, who want to make sure the farm is up to grade for food production and animal welfare. Grading is done on antibiotic use, cleanliness of facilities and equipment, as well as the condition of the cows. Both of these inspections have the power to shut down the farm if regulations are not being met, so farmers take them very seriously. Young farmers like the Clitheroes and the Dorlands truly love farming and seem to revel in the constant dynamic of change that confronts them every day. They have deep concern for the soil and the animals under their care, and are not spooked by the hefty numbers that populate their budgets. And they seem to possess infinite patience in the struggle to comply with all the rules and regulations of modern farming. These folks would be nowhere else on earth other than on their farms here in the municipality of Brighton, even if their phone moos at them now and then.